So when you're on the edge, like how I am here, you do have a couple options. You can bring it all down so there's a straight line. I find that for this project, because the lines are so wavy and wonky, that it looks kind of weird if you all of a sudden have a straight line. So I will usually just let it come off the page there. Kind of like how it does here. So like here it may start on, but then it'll eventually just kind of go off the page. So now I'm just going to go ahead and start filling in these columns in between. Always making sure that I come up and down to the same points. So then I could go ahead and flip, and I could start on one of the other sides. So I'm just going to pick a random column for now. So again, I'm just kind of forcing this column to do what I want it to do. The key is just to remember to come to and from, again, that same point. Turn the page if you need to. So then I'm just going to finish out this column. So this column is a little straight, especially compared to some of the others, and that's perfectly fine. That will actually help us achieve the principle of variety, so that not everything's all boring and the same. So then I could just fill in this column at this point. So notice you really can go sort of from column to column however you pick, as long as you understand the technique and how to draw those bands. One of the challenges that a lot of people face here is that they don't come back to the same point in between columns. And if you don't come back to the same point between columns, then what's going to happen is this area in here where the shadows are supposed to sort of start to take place won't. And you'll lose that depth that makes it look like the middle of each column is protruding off the page. You really need to have each line come back to that point to enhance that perspective. So then here I've got a funny situation. So what I'm going to do is just kind of bring one little bit out. And then bring this one kind of becoming its own little like split off of that column. Kind of like how a tree has branches. Sometimes that happens and it's perfectly fine. So then I could go to this column, I could go to some other column, but what I'm going to do for the purpose of this video is just show you a little bit more of finishing out this example so that you can see both. Now sometimes these sections end up really big by the time we erase pencil lines, so we'll talk about, if that happens, how you can kind of make it look a little bit more natural. So you see here what I'm doing is going back and forth and actually coming down, because for me, if I'm going to draw lines to dip down, this is the easiest way for me to have them all go to the same point. So it's really all about what works best for you. That's one of the things I really want to get across to you all this year. In art, and so many things, but especially in art, just because I show you a certain way of doing something does not necessarily mean that it's the only way of doing it. I really want you guys to start learning how to create projects for yourselves and start learning what works for you and what does not, so that you can really take control of your own learning in my classroom and in general. So pay attention to what I'm doing, but also see for yourself what works best. So then I'm just going to come up here. So this process, this part of the project, does take a little bit of time, especially to do it correctly. Because if I'm walking around, or if you're working at home and you show it to me on the Google Meet, and we feel like there's not enough depth happening, I will make you start that column over. And you will probably not like it at first, but in the long run, it will pay off, because you'll have more successful columns. So again, I've got a weird little offshoot there. So I'm just going to turn so I can finish this part out. Now all of these sort of sketchy looking lines, they'll eventually disappear. Because when I go over with an ultra fine tip Sharpie, I'm going to work on making sure that my lines are very smooth. And I'm not going to be picking the pen up in the middle of each line like how I currently am with the pencil. I'm going to make each line in one fell swoop like how this type of a mark is. So those are the way you're going to use the ultra fine tip Sharpie to kind of clean up any of your sketching lines. But sketching will sometimes help you get a better line to begin with. Plus it kind of forces most people to draw lighter, which will make it easier to then erase those lines when you need to. So at this point, obviously I have a couple more columns and spaces to finish on both sides. So I think you can see though a little bit how either way you choose to go about the project is perfectly fine. They both yield interesting results. And then our next steps would be to go ahead and start outlining with the ultrafine tip Sharpie, with the black ultrafine tip Sharpie. And then we would be erasing those pencil lines and then talking about color schemes and which color scheme you want to do.